wasn't through skyscrapers, which weren't around. It was through streetcars stretching out into the suburbs, many of which are now incorporated into the city and county of Denver. And Gabriel, I appreciate your pushing the slides along. And if you'd like more, Steve Leonard and I did this book, Denver Mining Camp to Metropolis, a more detailed history of the Mile High City. But this is what it looked like before the gold rush. Isn't that a great view of the South Platte River and of Long's Peak there in the background? Worthington Woodridge, an early artist, painted this scene. And by the way, Long, who came up this river in the 1820s, said it was clear, cool, and drinkable. Have any of you tried drinking the South Platte lately? This changed everything. And this is an actual photograph, Gabriel, just for you, of the discovery of gold in 1858 in Cherry Creek and the South Platte River. A few little sparkles there in the pan triggered the great gold rush, the great Pikes Peak, Colorado gold rush. It's estimated that 100,000 people rushed into what quickly became a Denver city and Colorado territory. These were the major routes in, the South Platte River route. If any of you travel I-76 up towards Nebraska, you know this route well today. Then the other route along the Arkansas River through Betts Fort in southern Colorado into the diggings there in the mountains. And let's see if I can point out Denver. Yep. Can we go back, Gabriel? Can you back up? Here's Denver City right here in Cherry Creek. Thanks. We can head on. And if any of you have any questions, if it's possible, I welcome those as we go along, Gabriel.
Okay, great. So if people do have questions, they can ask them, and then we'll save some also for the end. Okay,
yeah. Just unmute yourself and ask the question. This is Cherry Creek, flowing into the South Platte River here. You can see Arapaho Indians camped on the site. The Southern Arapaho had camped here for decades. This was one of their favorite spots. There was always water in the South Platte River. There were cottonwood trees. There was grass for their ponies. Oh, and in this painting, which is actually pretty accurate, you can maybe see a little ferry boat there at the far left of the screen. And this is Little Raven, head chief of the Southern Arapaho, had always camped here for all those years. Their pattern was to winter camp here where the weather is warmer than the rest of Colorado, where there are trees and wood and whatnot in the winter. Then as it gets warmer, head out onto the plains to hunt buffalo. And all summer long you'd be hunting buffalo. And then if we got into high summer, like we're in now, August, they would head up to the mountains. The Native Americans would follow the buffalo up to South Park or San Luis Valley or North Park or Middle Park, do their hunting there. Then the first snow, the first blizzard would come, and they would leave the high mountains and come back to camp at the confluence of Cherry Creek and the South Platte. And here is a Ute woman, well prepared for the snows and the hard climate here, and with her little papoose there, very well sheltered. I think those are elk teeth that are adorning her shawl. Okay, and next is a diorama at History Colorado showing women putting up the teepee. And guess who did all the work in those days? Women. You can maybe see one guy in the background kind of supervising or telling him what to do. But it was women who peeled these lodgepole pines, who designed the teepee, who put it up, tied it up like this, and made it a very warm, weather-proof habitation for the whole winter long. We condemn these women as squaws who don't have anything to teach us today, unless, next slide, you take a close look at DIA. Those are the same teepees that the Arapaho used. Many people scoffed at this design, said they would leak, that they would blow away in a hurricane or a tornado. But DIA is actually held up very well. The engineers have pronounced it a success. It doesn't collapse under snow loads. And it actually gets whiter with age as it bleaches out. So maybe these Indian women did have something to teach us after all about how useful and practical a teepee-shaped building was. The Native Americans were chased off, and so are these guys. And Gabriel brought one of these along today. Can we put him on? Let's see if I can find him.
We can
But
try.
these were the prairie dogs. There were millions. Yeah, you're gonna find those prairie dogs.
Did you bring 52 of them?
For everybody, right? But there were millions of these, just like there were millions of buffalo before the gold strike and the rush into Colorado. And today, of course, they're still being persecuted. This is an aerial view of the diorama at History Colorado, showing the 1400 block of Larimer Street. Over on the left-hand corner, you can see the Cherry Creek to get oriented. Then this block in the middle right here is Larimer Square today. And some of the buildings there still look a bit like this, although most of them are long gone. Notice the dirt streets, notice all the activity, the construction going on in Denver City. Denver City shown here, circa 1860. And onward, Gabriel. Oh, good. We're lucky with Colorado history. We have photographs from the very beginning of white settlement anyway. You can see what the streets look like, what the sidewalks look like. This is Blake Street. And here is one of the many saloons that were here. There were 38 of them by 1860. This one, the Occidental, advertised on the Rocky Mountain News. How many of you miss the Rocky Mountain News as much as I do? Sure wish it were still around. But they advertised in the news, come on into our reading room, have a drink, free stationery so you could ride home to your sweetheart in Kentucky or your family back in Vermont or whatever. They also had a Bible chained to the barn here to settle the theological arguments that get started, like about Noah's flood. When Noah stopped in Colorado to pick up the buffalo, where did he stop? And if you check out the Bible, the Old Testament here, you can find out that and a lot of other interesting information. We didn't have a free public library here until 1898. In the meantime, saloons were providing books and newspapers. One of them advertised newspapers, only a week old. Come on in, boys, enjoy a lager and get caught up on the news. Newspapers from Chicago, San Francisco. This is the origins of the city of Denver. If you ever wonder about the city of Denver and some of the crazy things it does and how it got started, keep in mind that it was conceived, born, and raised in the frame building here you see with a balcony. That is Apollo Hall in what's now Larimer Square. And I put a theater flyer next to it to remind you, it was also the first theater. Folks would have a few drinks downstairs, then go to that upstairs hall and watch even Shakespeare. They were performing as early as the 1860s there. That was at the city and county of Denver. The city is born in that little bar there, and elect Judge Lynch is their first official action. This is Judge Lynch at work. This is the Larimer Street Bridge. And the judge would hang a lot of people from this bridge, and usually he was pretty good about it. He'd tack a note on the corpse saying, this man was hung. He stole horses, he loved Indians, whatever the guy's crime was. This is Musgrave, a horse thief here, being strung up. And can you see what his last request was? What's he doing? He's having, as the Rocky Mountain News put it, one last smoke before he was jerked to Jesus, which I thought was fairly charitable. He might have been jerked the other way. But a view of early justice in Denver City. As I mentioned, there was no shortage of saloons in the early days. This is Eugene Madden's wet goods, not to be confused with a dry goods store. And maybe some of you know Dennis Gallagher, our late city auditor, councilman, legislator. This is his granddad's bar. And if you take a look at the guy in the front there with the suspenders, it looks a little bit like Dennis today. But behind the bar is Councilman Madden, who was elected councilman and lived his whole life as city councilman, no term limits in those days. This was a haven for the Irish immigrants in Denver. You'd come in here, meet Mr. Madden. He'd give you a free drink and ask who you were, what you were up to. He'd find you a job, might help you find a job with the city. And he also was very good about walking the whole ward in the Auraria neighborhood in what's now West Denver. He'd shake hands with everybody, kiss the babies, give candy to the ladies. And if your worthless son couldn't get a job, he'd get him a job with the city. All he asked, of course, was you vote the right way in exchange for his favors. And I found it was interesting in this bar, I found on the registration list there are 360 voters registered at this saloon, which gives Madden quite a lead in any election there when all of those guys out and folk. So apparently he took in the homeless too and gave you a vote.
Tom, we had one question. Was the judge's name Judge Lynch?
Yes, and that is a fictional name. There was several people who actually took that role, but the folklore is that it was Judge Lynch explaining what he did. I think there was actually Judge Lynch back east somewhere or other, but this is a fictional one. Here's Dennis Gallagher, who we mentioned, whose granddad was in that bar. And here's Dennis at a Democratic Party caucus. If you've never been to a Democratic caucus, this is what they look like. Two Democrats there. Before Denver was a railroad city, it was a stagecoach hub. And this is the way it got jumped on Auraria, on Golden, on Boulder, and other towns, is they actually bribed the stagecoach to come to Denver at 15th and Blake, 15th and Market, excuse me. And that building is still there, the one that says Wells Fargo and Company with stagecoach in front. The top floor is gone, but the first floor is still there at 15th and Market Streets today. Once the stagecoach comes to Denver, people move in here from Auraria, from Golden, from Boulder. They want to be near the transportation hub, the connection with the outside world, which is 700 miles back east. Another street scene, again, you see the dirt streets, the wooden sidewalks there. And this is actually Barney Ford's eating house at 15th and Blake Street. He was a black pioneer here who ran a popular restaurant and also was a barber, and becomes instrumental in opposing Colorado statehood until black suffrage for males, we should add, was written into that. A few of these buildings are still left today in the lower downtown historic district. Denver in the 1860 population is 4,759. Wait till 1870, wait till the next census count, we're going to be the biggest city in the West. We're going to pass Omaha. We're going to catch up with San Francisco. They take the census 10 years later in 1870, it's 4,769. That's a net gain of 10 people. The great boom city of the West is stagnating. And the problem is its lack of transportation. To get any ore out of the mountains, you didn't have any railroads, you had to use wagons like this. And then some of this ore was actually carted across the United States to Swansea, Wales. They have a way to separate these very difficult gold ores and extract the gold. As long as there are no railroads, Denver is going to continue to stagnate. This is the man who changes that. Governor John Evans, a friend of Abraham Lincoln. Denver is losing population in the 1860s to Cheyenne because that is the rail hub. That looks like it's going to be the regional metropolis. That's going to be the boom city. That's where you want to locate. Evans has enough property in Denver. He and friends want to invest here. So they create the Denver Pacific Railway and Telegraph Company, a little 106-mile long train that goes from Denver up to Cheyenne and connects Denver with that intercontinental system. Of course, Mount Evans is named for this man, a founder of the University of Denver, and the man who did the most to bring the railroads here. Here it is, the Denver Pacific Railway. You can see the towns along the way are named for some of the officers like Hughes and Evans. We have the railroads transforming the city, and then this is the way you got around the streetcar suburbs that we're talking about today. I bet many of you have seen this building. It's right across from Union Station. Today it's lofts, and there's restaurants on the first floor there at 17th and Wynkoop Streets, right across from Union Station. Inside were the car barns, these little horse-drawn streetcars. In those days, for a nickel, you could get to any of the suburbs of Denver, any parts of the city. And this is how the city spreads out that we'll talk about today. Here's another view of the same building and the original Union Station there in the mansard style. Isn't that an elegant building? It burns and is replaced by another building. And today we're actually on our third version of Union Station with a new center section. And here's another way you got around the horse-drawn streetcars that you just saw there. And this is an old postcard I found at the Denver Public Library. Dear Gertrude, some time ago, several of the girls and I went out to Fort Logan. We saw this funny little horse car at the end of the South Broadway car line. The horse pulls the car to the top of a very steep hill, then gets in the front end of the car and rides back down. I'm doing very well. Love, Sadie, July 9th, 1904. Now, I did a lot of work for you guys to figure out who that horse was. There were actually 6 different horses, all named Old Dobbin. And they say the great thing about Old Dobbin is that unlike some of the drivers or buses today, it would stop. That horse would stop automatically when it saw someone waiting along that Broadway car line. And in Englewood Public Library, by the way, they have a replica of that Sherilyn trolley, which took you from Denver to Englewood. Some people were conceived on railroads. Some people died on streetcars. This is the one to Fairmount Cemetery with a special hearse car where to put the corpse. Then the guests of honor and the brass band would be in the next car. And you get your free ride, your last ride out to Fairmount. They also had these to Riverside and about all of it cemeteries. This was the headquarters. You're on the South Platte River here. That's REI today, if any of you are familiar with that recreational emporium on there. And you can date the picture by the Steve McNichols for governor. This would make it in the 1950s. And this was the power plant generating electricity to get streetcars moving through the city. Those horse-drawn cars that you saw were replaced later by overhead electric current. Here's another view of it today. It's a beautifully recycled brick building. Used to be the power plant, now the recreational equipment store. And if you look closely on the building, you can see it's been beautifully cleaned up, the brickwork there. And what date was it built? I like these buildings that tell you, 1901. The Denver Tramway Company, which had a monopoly on streetcar service, run by the Evans family, interestingly enough. John Evans and his son, grandson, were the movers and shakers behind the Denver Tramway. Here's the streetcar system as of 1893. If you look closely, you'll see a majority of those lines going out to northeast Denver, which was the first quadrant of the city to really be developed. People thought that would be the future of the city. Over on the left of your screen, you can see North Denver. And I don't think you can read it here, but one of them says Jesuit College, which will be Regis College, and Sloan's Lake, and some early buildings there. Now take a look at Southwest Denver. Now where the key is, it says map of the city of Denver. Can you all see that? There's only one suburb. Oh, thanks, Gabriel. There's one suburb, Barnum. And that was Phineas T. Barnum of Ringling Brothers Barnum and Bailey Circus. And he bragged that the climate was so healthy in Barnum, he would live forever. And if you go to Barnum today, you'll still see quite a few healthy looking old folks. Let's go now southeast. Or here's a good back the suburbs. At the bottom, you see South Denver from Alameda to Yale, from Colorado Boulevard to the Platte River. And then over to the other side of it, you see Valverde, Westwood. Guys doing? Nobody's sleeping yet. You can take a nap. My students often do during these slideshows. Here we go again. These are the streetcar suburbs. South Denver, Harmon, you know, is Cherry Creek Shopping Center today. Montclair, Gabriel, do you have the pointer? Montclair in East Denver. And then up north, Auraria, Globeville, Argo, Swansea, Berkeley. All of those were separate towns, their own mayor, their own dog catcher, their own attempt at a school system. And then Highlands, one of the biggest of these, you still hear a lot about Highlands to this day, over in northwest Denver. Here you have all of these streetcar suburbs, originally separate towns that are annexed later the city of Denver. This is Curtis Park, 28th and Curtis Street, what is also known as 5 Points today. And this was where the first streetcar lines ran up from 16th Street up Curtis Street out to Curtis Park. Also up in Curtis Park is Dr. Justina Ford. You see this lady with her medical bag getting into a car. She's making home visits. She was the first African-American physician and one of the first women physicians in Denver. Her house that you see next to this is now the Black American West Museum, reminding us of her great work. And she would tend not only to African-Americans, but to anybody of color, Hispanics, Asians, many other people who were afraid a white doctor would not touch them, would not deal with them, or if he did, would charge them too much money. She would treat the patient first, then if you could pay, she would ask you to pay or give her some produce or whatever you could give in exchange for her services. Some 8,000 people of color in Denver were delivered by Dr. Justina Ford. We mentioned the first streetcar line was up there at Curtis Park. This is the second one. If you can see it at the bottom there by the lady in that wonderful white dress, can you see the horse-drawn streetcar? This is Highlands over in North Denver. The streetcar line came across 15th Street, then ran up and down what's now Federal Boulevard. This painting is a little confusing, so don't try to figure that out. This one's easier. That's Federal Boulevard on the right there. Down at the end of that is Boulevard School at 24th and Federal. It's still there. It's now condos. It's been preserved. And people can go back in their old age and their retirement and go back to the second grade or first grade and use that for their apartment. This was the original St. Luke's Hospital in the foreground. And here you have the Highland Town Hall. It was a pretty big town. It actually tried to rival Denver for a while. That building is gone. There's a fire department on that, fire station on that site today, around 20th and Federal, I think it is. Here's one of the landmarks of Highlands, the Asbury Methodist Church. Now I think it's condos. And here's St. Patrick's Catholic Church. As you can guess, the Irish were involved here. And the priest went to California, saw those beautiful California missions, and came back and wanted to do a mission-style church. This is still around. It's landmark today. And some sisters from Mexico actually live there. The Poor St. Clairs, they're called. And they sell great cookies if you're ever in the neighborhood. This was for the Italian Catholics. Our Lady of Mount Carmel Church at 36th and Tejon Street. And it's interesting that within just a few blocks there, you have all of these Catholic churches for the different immigrant groups, giving you some idea of how densely packed those neighborhoods were. And each ethnic group, of course, wanted its own church. This is Our Lady of Guadalupe. If you take a look at the Virgin there, she's not white Carrara marble like at the Italian church. She is brown-faced. She is Hispanic. And that, of course, is still a great church for Spanish-speaking people today, complete with mariachi masses. Here's the cornerstone, as you can see, and Father Lepore, the founder, who was shot and killed right next door. And the Italian community, Our Lady of Mount Carmel, raises money through gaming and bingo and gaming nights like this one, the Feast of San Rocco every year, where you get some great food, maybe make some money. This is Audi Cerrone, the butcher over there in North Denver. And take a look at those butcher blocks. He said they came all the way from the old country, from Italy. And if you look closely up on top there, do you see the statue of Our Lady? I don't know about you, but I feel safer in a butcher department with Our Lady there. But you never see her at King Soopers or Safeway, do you? Patsy's, now closed, one of the many Italian restaurants in North Denver, which were delicious and inexpensive. Here's Our Lady of Our Lady of Guadalupe Church again. It started out as a mission church and then grew into what you see today. Spanish speaking for those folks. North Denver is the poorer side of town. This man develops the wealthier side of town, Capitol Hill. This is Henry C. Brown, Henry Cordes Brown of Brown Palace fame, and also of Capitol Hill, where he platted what's now the Capitol Hill neighborhood for the wealthy for their mansions. And developer John Smith named the streets for John Smith's native state of Pennsylvania for his favorite Civil War generals, Lincoln and Grant and Sherman and Logan. And then John W. Smith threw in his granddaughter, Pearl. So that's how you have Pearl in there with all these famous generals and politicians. How do you get to Capitol Hill? You take the Colfax Avenue horse-drawn streetcar. And Henry C. Brown also gave the land for the state capitol, thinking that would be the deluxe neighborhood, that would bring wealthy people over into that neighborhood. And I checked out the drawings for this and the Colorado State Archives. And can you all see the lady on top? The drawing of her, and you can see her placed on top of the Capitol. I looked into this, and Dennis Gallagher helped me figure out what happened here. They decided this figure should be the most shapely woman in Colorado. So the state Senate took it upon themselves to have a contest to examine all of these beautiful, shapely women to see which one should be the model. Needless to say, they couldn't decide. Each of them had their favorite. Some were accused of having their mistress or their daughter or their wife in the mix. They couldn't decide. They then had all the ladies go over to the House of Representatives and see if they could decide. They too spent months and months studying the female form. That was a lot more fun than a lot of the stuff our legislature has to deal with. They too couldn't decide. So we still don't have the lady on top of the Capitol. I think it's going to take our first woman governor to get that statue in place where it should be.
Can you temporarily go back to the streetcar before the Capitol picture?
Yeah, if Gabriel can do that.
Yeah.
Good job, Gabriel. Yes, you had a question.
The printing on the bottom, I can see 125 Depot. What does it say before that? It looks almost like it's Hebrew.
I read Union.
I think it's Union Transit, if I'm reading it correct. I don't think it's Hebrew.
No?
Although it looks a little that way, doesn't it?
Yes.
Anybody else with better eyes out there want to read this? Oh, no, I want to.
It says Union Depot.
Right, thank you. Union Depot being
Okay.
out down by the Union Depot, where you saw those horse-drawn cars coming out of the horse barn.
Thank you.
Whoever bright-eyed, who was it that figured that out?
And Tom, we're running a little short on time, so why don't we save the rest of the questions for the end? We'll try to
Okay.
get through as many more slides as we can.
Okay, yeah. And you can cut this off, Gabriel, whenever we have to. Henry C. Brown was right. Once you put the state capitol in, look at all these mansions that go in on Lincoln and Grant and Sherman. Nearly all of these are gone today. 2 buildings are left. If you look closely, you see the spire at the end of 18th Avenue for Trinity United Methodist Church. And across from the old Navarre, now the Anschutz art collection. Okay. Some of the mansions, this is the governor's mansion that you see here at the bottom right, and then the Grant Humphreys mansion, and then the elegant school there, the Dora Moore School serving Capitol Hill. All of these are landmarked today, preserved. This was not landmarked in time, it was knocked down. Beautiful French chateau here was at Tinson, Pennsylvania, the Good Mansion knocked down for a parking lot. They've tried to clean up Colfax over the years. How many of you remember Sid King's? Somebody found this revolving girl objectionable. She was removed. And this is now the Snug, an Irish pub, no more of Sid King's famous strip club. And I thought this was one of the most interesting. When the Jesus Freaks were popular along East Colfax, they came up with the Holy Ghost Repair Service. I've always been tempted to try that and see if they could restore our souls. Here is once again the Dora Moore School, a beautiful landmark preserved today. And look at the fine artwork in Dora Moore. Do you see the angel's face down there? I think if more schools had angels and cherubs carved into them, the kids might behave better. We now have 365 individually designated landmarks in Denver. This is the Magic Bronze plaque that wards off the devil, those developers who would tear down a building to put up a parking lot or a high rise. Here's a map of the historic districts. There's something like 55 of those today. The biggest one you can see in the kind of center left, center right, East 7th Avenue Parkway, all the way from Colorado Boulevard down to Logan Street. And then up in northwest Denver, quite a few different landmarks. The most famous of all these now is the lower downtown district, the old Skid Row. Once it was designated a landmark district, there were tax incentives to restore and fix up those buildings. It's now a great success story. How do you turn your Skid Row into $1 million lofts, pricey brew pubs and restaurants? And here is the ugly side of Denver. This is the Globe smelter up in Globeville. And in those days, you wanted to see the smoke coming out. That meant jobs, that meant prosperity. But ores from all over the Rocky Mountain region are shipped there. This is the Argo office there. And some of the workers, many of them Scandinavians, working at the Globe smelter. And this was life in Denver in the 1880s, 1890s. These were the most common jobs, working in those hot, dangerous, smelly smelters. And here's the final product, all these gold bricks. And I brought one of these, Gabriel, too, to pass around. Did you? You don't have that, do you? Where did that gold brick go? And the prairie dog.
With those and the prairie dogs, I think we...
Were any of you there this day? When they tore down the Grant Smelter stack. If you're trying to get located, that's the Coliseum in the background on the horizon there. They said this was unstable, needed to be torn down. It took 3 days to get this supposedly unstable stack down. Today we leave it as a monument to the mining industry. I don't think many people coming into Denver today realize it was a mining town, and that's how the city got started. But Globeville, another of these streetcar suburbs. And what City Park was what's a farm. And Denver's probably biggest and most important park, with a zoo there, with a Museum of Nature and Science, with this wonderful pavilion here. And are any of you ladies in this picture? Well, these girls enjoying the sandy beach. And the lily pond. This has now been restored at City Park. And that wonderful fountain that Mayor Spear put in back in 1906, I think it was, that has now been turned back on. You can see it on summer nights playing again. And this was the original Museum of Nature and Science. That was a wading pool. They no longer do wading there, but you have a fountain in the middle of it. And it was a popular museum. City Park was also a place for tourists to park. You could auto camp there, as they called it, camp in your out of your back of your car, enjoy City Park. This was a great invitation to tourists. The Thatcher Memorial Statue of Loyalty, Love, and Liberty, I think her name was. And it's beautiful in spring when the crab apples are in bloom. East High School. The idea was to have these big neighborhood parks like Wash Park and Viking Park and City Park had those be little civic centers where you would have your schools, your high schools on those parks, have your branch libraries, your fire stations, and whatnot. This is East High, a landmark school. Any East High grads with us today? I bet there are. And here's David, who the students would decorate.
Absolutely.
Good for you, Jane. Do you remember dealing with David,
I don't know who David is.
the statue?
Oh, no, I don't know. Maybe David wasn't there then. I never saw anything naked.
And right across from East High is the Bonfeas Memorial Theater. Now the Tattered Cover Bookstore. Here's Montclair, the neighborhood I live in East Denver, and Hilltop. And you can see there the Colorado Women's College at the extreme left of the picture, and that would be Oneida Street, the thicker street there, and a 1910 view of Aurora and Montclair in East Denver. Montview Boulevard. And one of the great churches there, Park Hill Methodist Episcopal Church, like many, many churches, and I suppose synagogues too. Phil Goodstein maybe told you about that. But at any rate, they started out in a tent, raised the money, and then built a beautiful, magnificent church today, landmark on Montview Boulevard. Here is the boulevard. This was Mayor Spear's City Beautiful scheme of putting in these beautiful parkways out to the different neighborhoods of Denver. And he put in the parkway ahead of development. As you can see here, people criticized him, said, you're wasting land. You can't tax that. You can't mine it. You can't farm it. What are you doing? He said, wait and see. We'll put in beautiful parkways and boulevards, and people will build fine houses along there that we can tax them enough to pay for these improvements.
And notice that every tree had to be planted.
Exactly. Park Hill, of all the streetcar suburbs, has one of the most dramatic histories when this little black girl wanted to go to school in Park Hill, but she couldn't. Blacks were kept on the other side of Colorado Boulevard. Even a special school was built for them to keep them from coming into Park Hill. This led to a Supreme Court case, ultimately got all the way to the Supreme Court. It led to busing of the Denver public schools. It was a bitter time for some, but it has a happy ending. And that is when blacks wanted to move in the neighborhood, the realtor knocks on your door and says, they're coming, they're coming. Every month you wait, the value of your property is going down. Blockbusting, they called it, a standard practice throughout the United States of warning people their neighborhood was doomed to go black. But in Park Hill, they said, hold it. Couldn't we have, here it was just Park Hill, but soon restored to Park Hill, couldn't we actually have a mixed neighborhood? The churches, the synagogues would actually invite black newcomers into the church, introduce them to people. A block would close down, you'd have the one new black family there, meet all the other white families, and guess what? They wanted good schools, they wanted a tree-shaded neighborhood. The Greater Park Hill Community Association, you can see their logo, fought this and said, could we have an integrated neighborhood? And today, Park Hill claims to be one of the best integrated neighborhoods in the country, showing that blacks and whites could live together. Here's Colfax Avenue and the town of Montclair. Maybe you can read that at the very bottom. Colfax Avenue, Montclair, one of the most fascinating of these streetcar suburbs, founded by the Baron Walter B. von Richthofen. Does the name Richthofen ring a bell?
Muffin Castle.
Yeah, built the castle. And also, there was a famous Mount Richthofen named for another of his relatives. He plans the ultimate suburban town, Montclair, and brings his wife out to show her the place and sets up a tally-ho coach that would take you from downtown, from Union Station, out to take a look at land in Montclair, hopefully buy your lot there and build your mansion out in Montclair. And the show home was the Richthofen Castle that you see here. It's just been restored. And here are some of the mansions of the Montclair neighborhood. And Richthofen also built this molkery for lung disease people. For tuberculosis victims would lie out there on the open upper porch in the sunshine and fresh air. Oh, can we go back just a sec, Gabriel? And while you stable cattle down below, you would drink fresh milk right out of the cow's tit. and you would breathe the barnyard effluvium, the aroma rising from the stables, and that would supposedly cure your TB or your asthma or any lung problems. He also proposed a great casino along what's still called Bonico Parkway because the casino was supposed to be there, but it didn't last long. It opened, and locals found pictures of naked women in that casino and forced it to close. Here you are in eastern Montclair. That's Auraria in the background. People were promised there would be great houses and great buildings here. They got out here, and often it looked pretty bleak like this. Montclair is one of the many historic districts there to preserve the castle, the mulcry, and some of the older homes at the heart of the neighborhood. The landmark designation led this guy to put in this false front, this Italianate front on what's otherwise a little shack along Quebec Street. You see this? So you two could dress up your modest home and have it become historic. Well, it's been a ride on the streetcars. Their last day is June 3rd, 1950. How many of you can remember those? I bet some of you can. And quite a wait. Okay, Gabriel? It's to win when the streetcars come back. Here's a guy I've been waiting ever since gas was 29 cents a gallon on Colfax Avenue. But it finally happens. And hub, once again, is Union Station, where we have a rebuilt light rail system operating out of there. And here are those lines. Most of them, well, half of them completed today. We don't have the line up to Longmont yet. But North Metro is supposed to open, I think, this year. The DIA line is in. So we're actually rebuilding the streetcar system that we once had in place, to rip nearly all of it out, now replacing it.